So if you can advance, actually, there's an interesting slide here too of what happened after the 1950s. This is from the Texas Water Plan, and it actually shows our water supply over time. The beginning of the curve there is in the 50s, and you can kind of see how water reservoirs were built up over time. And then there's a very sharp drop right at the end. And then if you go to the next slide, that kind of, I think, also talks about what's going on from the water plan. That's the bar on the top is demand, and the bar on the bottom is supply. So this next question for Representative Darby, if you go to the next one, this is the mayor of Robert Lee, and that is the E.V. Spence Reservoir, and that was one of several reservoirs built after the drought of record in the 1950s. It's essentially empty right now, and this is in your district. If the water plan does get funded, what kind of projects are we going to see in your district? Do large reservoirs make sense, or are y'all looking at kind of different, maybe more innovative ways?
We are essentially reservoir rich and water poor. We have, in San Angelo, we have 5 surface reservoirs that we have an interest in, and the most any reservoir has is about 20%, and that's HOIV. Which was built in the 1980s, early 80s, and that's been the last surface reservoir built in Texas. The problem is not so much having access to reservoirs, it's having access to water in those reservoirs. And so John is that mayor's name, and Robert Lee was within 2 weeks of being out of water. A city of about I guess there's about 1,000 water taps in the city of Robert Lee. So we laid, with the help of the Water Development Board and various groups, we laid an emergency pipeline to the city of Brant, which is about 11 to 12 miles away from Robert Lee, and we laid a pipe along the ground, and we got emergency water from the treatment facility in Brant to the city of Robert Lee. But interestingly, that mayor made a comment to me, and keep in mind, he had less than 2 weeks water supply left, but because he had a limited amount of users to bear the cost to lay this emergency line and to obtain this alternative water source, he said, Drew, we passed a increase in the water bill, and we raised our water we raised it by $5, and I don't know if my people can afford an additional $5 a month water bill. And I looked at him puzzled, and I said, Mayor, what are they going to pay when you're trucking water into your community? So, which points out what I think is probably one of the least talked about parts of this puzzle is that we as a state have historically not valued water as a resource. It's easy to say that oil well, that barrel of oil, light crude, $95 to $100 a barrel. And so we know how much that barrel costs. We know how much it takes to refine that barrel, distribute it back to our gasoline pumps, and when it comes out of the pump into our car, then that's $3.40 or $3.50 a gallon. We don't use those same techniques with regard to water. Historically, it's something that has flowed from God. We accumulate it in reservoirs, and then we take it out, we treat it, and we distribute it. And so 10 years ago, I looked at water rates throughout the country, and I found that of all the water rates in the country, West Texas has some of the lowest water rates. In a drought-prone area, we have some of the lowest water rates. For example, today, 1,000 gallons is $1.86 for 1,000 gallons of water. And so we are undervaluing that resource as our community and as a state. And so we're going to have to transition from the idea that water is plentiful and is cheap to an era in which we're going to have to find more costly. All the cheap water has been found, all the cheap water has been used and treated, but now we're going to have to find water resources and water alternatives that are going to be far more expensive. And so it's going to be incumbent to the folks in this room and in the sound of my voice that as you grow in your business career and lives, water is going to have to start be valuing at the true value and not simply as a free resource brought from the good Lord. So that's going to be a very difficult and painful process for politicians like us. It's never pleasant to try to convince people that you're paying too little for an essential, absolute critical resource, but that's really where our state's going. We're going to have to, all the water we're going to be having to plan for and use in the future is going to be considerably more expensive.